Started. Sorry for the slightly delayed start. This is the Upper Dublin Board of School Directors Operations Committee meeting. It is March 22nd, 2018. It is 6:05 p.m. We will start right, I'll call the meeting to order and we'll start right in. We have one presentation from PFM Financial Advisors. Go ahead, Jamie. Or Brenda, did you have anything to open with?
We oftentimes usually have Ms. Doyle and PFM at our finance committee, but because tonight Ms. Doyle's focus will be on funding of Sandy Run Middle School, she's speaking to operations.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. I'm Jamie Doyle from Public Financial Management, independent financial advisor to the school district. And for those of you that were on the board back in July when I last presented, this handout with the blue cover will look very similar to that July handout. And so I'd really like to discuss the market conditions and what has happened over the last several months. So if you look at page 1 of that handout, the top chart, you'll be able to see that the good news is long-term fixed interest rates are still below historic averages. That's the blue line. The red line is the historic average on the long end of the curve, which is what you care about the most when you're looking to borrow funds. You care about the long end of interest rates on the curve. Now you will notice the blue line, the short end of the curve, is higher than historic rates, and that's a function of the Federal Reserve Committee raising interest rates as recently as yesterday, and that was all factored into the market. And I'm happy to say, I always tell you I'm conservative early on in my estimates, and I'm happy to say that the numbers I'm going to share with you in a minute still look like they did in July, because I anticipated interest rates rising, and so that was built into the options I shared with you. So they don't look any worse than when I last met with you. If you look at the bottom half of that chart, you can just see the day-to-day movement of this same index, and this is the 10-year MMD, which stands for Municipal Marketplace Data. And if you look on the far right there, you can see the all-time low rates were set in June of 2016, right after the Brexit vote. You can see the knee-jerk reaction upward that the bond market in particular had to the election results. You can see how the market settled back down, and you can see how it's been increasing over the last couple of months, and that's a function of many different things, including an improving economy. I am going to skip back, and we can spend more time on any of these pages if you want to, but I'm going to skip back to the options that we went over in July. Again, these options look almost identical to what I showed you last time. So what we looked at in option 1 was a 3-step plan for a total of $70 million, keeping 2 of the steps below the $10 million threshold, and I'm on page 5, to recognize the bank-qualified tax-exempt interest rates that have 5-year call features. I would say that right now there's not a huge difference between bank-qualified and non-bank-qualified rates. That's the first time I'm saying that in a long time. But there's still a big value to bank-qualified interest rates because it has the 5-year call feature on, which is more important than ever under the new federal tax reform, which actually eliminated the ability to do advance refundings on a tax-exempt basis. There's lots of other ways to sort of achieve the same result. Unfortunately, all those other ways come with greater cost to you as the issuer and greater risk. And that's the unfortunate part. Fortunately, you don't have any of those advance refunding opportunities that are viable right now in current market conditions. I would also say on that topic, you know, there are lots of different issuers and lots of different interest groups within the industry that are fighting hard to reinstate advance refundings on a tax-exempt basis. So I would not be surprised if that tool in the toolbox didn't return at some point. It might not be on the first try, but you know, I think there's enough interest and value in bringing those back as a viable financing tool. So back to page 5 and this option. So this $70 million structuring option assumes a level repayment structure. And so the two things that we compare, because we're going to compare option 1 to option 2 in a minute, are the estimated interest to be paid over the life versus the upfront net millage equivalent. So you can see that interest line in the top boxes broken out for each step and totaled there on the far right. And so if we were to utilize this plan and this level payment structure, down below in column 6, you can see your existing debt service. So if you did nothing, you'd continue to make the debt service payments in column 6. Column 7 would be the new debt service associated with the first almost $10 million that you see in step 1. And so you can see in column 7, that pretty much levels off at, I'll call that $750,000 a year. Then, and that would be your calendar 2018 transaction. Then we'd come back in calendar year 2019 to do step 2 there in the middle. Down below in column 9, you can see the debt service on that particular step. And right now, that's kind of the rest of the issue, 50 million, 10,000. You know, we'll tweak this again when we get a draw schedule and see exactly how your architect estimates that your monthly draws might look. But you can see what that $50 million borrowing might look like in column 9. And then in column 11, you can see the estimated debt service for the step 3 last almost $10 million of the issue. And column 11 levels off at about $800,000 a year. So that all in column 12, between your old debt service and the estimated debt service from these 3 new issues, in column 12, you can see what that looks like. And you hit a high point of around 16.3 million all in, old debt and new debt. Now, the next couple of columns are meant to show offsets to that debt service. So in column 13, you can see your estimated state reimbursement, and that's on the old debt. That's on column 6, because this analysis assumes, you know, worst case scenario that the Plan Com moratorium continues and that you don't get any state reimbursement on the new project. So column 13 is state reimbursement on column 6, your old debt service. And then that in column 14, you can see that net effect. Now your high point is really just over 16 million. And I apologize, these numbers are really small. Fortunately, I think everybody has a copy, and maybe you're not looking at them on the screen. So continuing on, your gross millage equivalent in column 15 is about 2.5 mils, 2.49 mils. But you've done an excellent job of thinking ahead and planning for this project. So you can see in column 16, you've already identified 1.17 of those mils as available for this project, and you'll notice that 0.26 mils isn't occurring until the 1920 school year. So you've identified that availability of millage estimated for 1920. So the real net millage equivalent in column 17 for this structure and this size project is about 1.32 mils. So keep 1.32 mils in the back of your head, and at the top box there under total, about $36 million in interest for this option. If you look at option 2 on page 6, same $70 million project, only a different financing structure. So this is a wraparound structure, meaning that where some of your old debt pays off in column 6, we can use those freed up dollars and those freed up mills from the old debt going away and pledge them today or at the time of issuance to go toward the new debt service, and therefore minimize that upfront millage equivalent on the new debt. So if you did the same 3 steps in the same 3 amounts, but with wraparound structure, you can see what happens. The interest goes up, the estimated interest on the 3 borrowings goes up to about 52 million, but the net millage equivalent, you know, after we net out your 1.17 mils that you already have identified, your net millage equivalent is about 1/4 mil. So you can see that's the trade-off. And you know, I think about this a couple of different ways. One of which is, you know, you have taxpayers out in those out years that will be sharing in the benefits of the project. You know, that's one argument that you can use to justify the wraparound payment structure and the greater interest. It's keeping those upfront millage equivalent as low as possible. But the opposite side of that argument is you pay a lot less interest on the level payments. There's no right or wrong answer here. It's just a business decision, and that's up to you at the end of the day. And, we'll be back to have this conversation every time it's time to do a step of the plan. So you might decide, to do the first step as a level payment structure, and then, God forbid if something happens, you can always, switch one of the other steps back to the wrap, or, do a combination, really, of the two structures. You're not married to just one or the other, because we'll have this conversation 2 more times at least after this. I'm sure more than 2. So I will pause there for a minute, but that's a recap of the lengthier presentation that I gave back in July at a public meeting at that time. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you have at this time, or if there are areas you'd like to spend more time on.
Thank you, Jamie. I do have one question or comment, I think. So the updates in this chart from July are minimal, but they're slight. Right? They're slight
Yes.
changes because of changes in interest rates. Is that
No,
primarily
I
the
didn't. I actually
driver?
didn't have to change the interest rates.
Okay.
Because I had enough conservatism in early on, so I actually didn't change the interest rates. The main thing that changed is just the step 1 timing. I think I originally, back in July, might have had that settling April 1 of 2018. Obviously,
right,
that's
yeah.
not going to happen, so I pushed it back to July 5th. Would probably be about the earliest you could settle if you so chose.
Okay, thank you. And so there are changes, and to Brenda, so we're still looking at 1 mil is 2.2 million for the purposes of these calculations. What is our actual 1 mil number today? It's higher than that, isn't it?
It is. It's about $100,000 more.
Okay.
About 2.3. When we get closer, Jamie and I will be fine-tuning that number.
Okay, thanks. Anyone else on the board our committee have questions? Dan?
Jamie, when would we go to put out the debt? Is it like months before we actually need the money? What is the time frame there?
It's roughly a 60-day process, give or take a week or 2, but from the time you say, okay, go do, and you're only authorizing step 1. Like I said, we'll be back to discuss the other steps as we go. But from the time you say go, it takes me about a month to put all the documents together in conjunction with bond counsel. It takes 3 weeks of that is just to get your credit rating. And so I'll call it a month till we get to sale, and then it's another month from sale to settlement. You lock in the interest rates at the time of sale, so they don't change after that. They can't change between the sale and the settlement. And the reason there's a month between sale and settlement is the Department of Community and Economic Development has to approve your debt, and they have 20 days to do that, and they pretty much take all 20 days. So I'll call it a 60-day process from go till when the money shows up in your construction fund available to pay invoices.
Would these bonds be commingled with other tax-free municipal bonds, or would they be like subject just Upper Dublin School District will float these bonds, and you would sell them all to one group, or?
They'll be in the name of Upper Dublin School District, so they won't be commingled with anybody else's bonds. It's just your general obligation series of bonds. They'll probably be called Series of 2018. And, they aren't necessarily just sold to one group. They can be sold to, retail investors, institutional investors, whoever is aggressively looking for paper, because our goal is always to get you the lowest possible interest rate.
Mr. Schroeder.
Anyone else? Yes.
I know that you said choosing between option 1 or 2 or a mix is up to school districts, and there's no right or wrong answer, but could you tell us what, in general, more school districts do? What is the typical way of
That's a great question.
doing it?
I would say that most school districts choose option 2 for the sole reason that there's a lot of other stuff going on in your operating budget, and most school districts, pick the option that has the lowest possible upfront millage impact, leaving them room to deal with the other things going on in regular operations within the constraints of Act 1.
Art?
Well, last time you were here, a concern that you had for option one was the significant fluctuation between the yearly payments. One year you could be making payments of 16 million. Another year you can making a payment of 12 or 13 million. How does a district actually,
Well,
how are they able to do that?
by state law, I mean, other than the phase-in period, because what you're seeing, I'm back on page 5, and I'm looking at column 14.
Yep.
So you're seeing the phase-in period, which on this ends in fiscal year ending 2023, so that's when you hit 16 million in column 14. And then by state law, you have to have overall, which is column 14, level or declining debt service. It's not allowed to fluctuate up by more than like 10%, and that's state law. So I'm actually not concerned because that's declining debt service, and you know, you have those drop-offs for other things, whether they're operational things or additional capital projects. You know, you have those drop-offs freed up for other things you want to do.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you, Jamie.
Thank you.
We'll now move on to the regular business portion of our meeting. Yeah, actually, why don't we do that? If anyone, so we'll, what Art just suggested was we do a community input for that topic only if anyone in the community has a question while Jamie is here. Go ahead, Jenny.
Why not, right? So I did actually, prepared for class today, brought the one from July, and over the many years, it actually is costing, it looks like $3 million more dollars. It went up from 118 million total to 122 million total for the long one, right? And that's because we're pushed out a year. I don't really understand that. So I'm looking at the one from July. And the total payment with the 70 million plus the interest of 52 million is now 122 million, and it was 70 million plus 49 million to be like 118 million.
Okay, you're
So-
going to have to tell me what page you're on.
Yeah, you can look at it.
I've got it. She's,
Okay.
was that the only
That's from the
question?
July, this is from the one back in July
Right,
when we
was
saw
that,
that.
but was that your only question? Do you have another one?
No, I have another one.
Okay.
And then my question is, can you roughly tell me what that tax is? So with the .23, what's that tax increase on the average house? And then with the 1.32 or whatever, I'm looking at 2 different years, whatever,
Yeah.
what the difference was. And my other question is, if for some reason we happen to have an extra like $5 million, $10 million, do we have to borrow the 50, or like are we kind of locked into that? Can we reduce what we end up borrowing if we do it? And the difference between the two looks to me to be $17 million. And so I wonder if we could plan or try to save money to make the one happen, because at the end of the day, we're saving $17 million is no small amount. And can you prepay? Can you pay down earlier than the structure?
That's a lot of questions.
Okay, sorry.
Let me.
All right, anyone else have questions? No? Okay. So Jamie, the first question was, looking at the top right box in column 4 for option 2, she's observing that the total interest for this version is about $3 million more than the total interest from July. And how does delaying the start of the first borrowing make that happen? Right, Jenny? That's the question? Yeah.
I see exactly what you're talking about now. That's a function of what we're wrapping around. And some of the reimbursement percentages changed a little bit on some of the older issues. So we did change how we're wrapping around the old debt service a little bit. But it's still a wrap, and the interest rates are still the same. We just changed how we're wrapping around the old debt a little bit. You're exactly right. I don't know if I'm taking these in order. I didn't write these down. You're exactly right. In tonight's handout, the difference between option 1 and option 2 is about $17 million, and that's all interest.
Jamie, just for 2 reasons. One, speak closer into the mic so that we
Sorry.
can hear you, and really address us. Ginny will hear, but yeah, that's okay.
Sorry about
Yeah.
that. You're not locked into the 70 million. I'm sure that will change many times as we get more information and you make more decisions on the project. So, you're never locked into anything. We do have the sale for one step at a time, and I'm sure it won't turn out exactly the way I have it laid out here because I don't have a draw schedule yet, and it will depend on what that draw schedule looks like. All of these bond issues will have an optional redemption feature, meaning you get to call bonds and it's at your option as the issuer and your option only. So part of why we're trying to keep two of the issues under 10 million is that optional redemption or call feature will be 5 years on the two that are less than 10 million, and it'll probably be 7 or 8 years because we'll have to have a year where there's an issue bigger than 10 million, I would imagine, based on how long it will take you to do the project.
So that was the answer to can you prepay, right?
Yes.
You can sort of prepay. It's not like
Yes.
you can on a home mortgage, but at 5 years you can effectively
Right,
prepay.
and that's part of what federal tax law is changing for you. Under, the old rules, you got one advance refunding on a tax-exempt basis during the life of the loan. Now, you don't have that on a tax-exempt basis. You can still do it on a taxable basis, but obviously that costs you more. There are some other financing vehicles that can achieve the same thing, but they're not nearly as efficient as a tax-exempt advance refunding would be. So that's why it's more important than ever to get 5-year calls on, what we can on this.
And the last question, I'm hoping Brenda was doing the math during this now, was what's the percentage equivalent for that 0.24 mil? It's hard to calculate exactly because it doesn't happen until 2021 in the schedule, but we did approximate it from the July presentation. Do you remember the number?
I thought it was 600,000, a little over 600,000.
Which is under 0.1%. Are you doing math now? Is that?
And I did try to spread that, relatively equally in column 17 between fiscal year ending 20 and fiscal year ending 21, so it wasn't all in one year.
Doing simple math of the 0.24 divided by the current millage
Right.
millage of 33.0254 is 0.007. You said 1/10 of a mil. Yes,
So 0.7%
Yeah.
based on today's millage and today's assessed value.
assessed value.
But we're also assuming with that additional .24 that by the time we need the .24, we're not going to be able to identify any additional recurring money that's coming into the district that we can dedicate and not raise the taxes that .14 and maybe not the .1.
Right, pessimistic assumptions.
Right.
This is worst case 0.7, based on today's numbers. If based on today's millage, it would presumably be higher by 2021, and based on today's assessed value, which we expect to be higher by 2021. So that 0.7% should be lower by 2021.
Correct.
Or nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, similarly, when we're saying that we're using one of the new properties in Upper Dublin, that we're going to dedicate that money for Sandy Run, there could be another property where we can say, okay, well, we're going to dedicate $500,000 of this to go toward the Sandy Run project. We're not going to spend it twice.
Thank you. But yes,
All right, I think we got all of those questions. Janine nods, yes? Okay. Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you.
All right. And there will be another community input at the end of the meeting, but thank you all for indulging us. So we'll move on to the regular business portion of the meeting. Are there any announcements or communications, Ms. Bray?
not this evening.
All right, and we have minutes from the February meeting. If anyone has comments on those, please get them to Brooke. And so we'll move into the reports and recommendations. First up are bid results for Fort Washington Electric Service.
Yes, last week we opened the bids for the electric service. We were happy. We had 7 bidders. Carr and Duff came in the low bid at $242,800. They were $10,000 less than the next bidder. We did talk to Carr and Duff. Our engineer talked with Carr and Duff. Their numbers look solid. This is the bid that they are sticking with, and recommend that we award this project to Carr and Duff.
Have we used Carr and Duff before for similar projects?
I don't know history for the district that they have. I have used them for other projects in the past, yes.
Okay.
They're a reputable firm, and I certainly worked with them before. They have bid on several of our projects, but just not have been the low bidder over the last 3 years.
Go ahead, Sarah.
Do we have an idea what happened with Westcott?
They read some
We
other
looked at that,
request, apparently.
We're thinking there was a last minute mistake and they just threw a 2 in front of their number, so they, instead of withdrawing their bid.
Yeah, you probably can imagine, because it was the last one I opened, and I was like, what? Yeah. Good point.
All right, so we'll move that forward to the, oh, Stan.
What was the budget
Sorry.
for this project?
Budget 400, or was it 3? I'd have to look that up, but
It was higher than
this is
242.
definitely under what we had budgeted.
All right, so we'll move that forward to the legislative meeting. Stan? Yes? Yes. Okay, thank you. All right, next up is Maple Glen chiller replacement bid opening.
Yes, we delayed this bid opening by another week. We wanted to have the results for this meeting tonight, but we decided to extend it, and the extension was purely for legal review of the contract language. The technical specifications that the bidders are working on are solid. I talked to a few of the people working on it, and there's been really haven't been any questions for the technical aspects of the bid. This is purely for legal review of contract wording and insurance.
Okay, so that will appear at the legislative meeting as an item we had not previously reviewed, so we'll have the discussion there. Everyone comfortable with that? Questions? Okay. Next up, Administrative Center Accessory Building.
Yes, just want to give an update. This is the building that we had bids on last year that we rejected because the roof replacement and repairs to the building were too costly. We did perform our hazard assessment. A hazardous materials assessment of the building is required before any demolition takes place. Element Environmental did conduct that test for us. The only thing they had found was lead paint on the paint, some of the wood door frames and window frames. So that would be noted in any contractor. We started seeking prices for the demolition of the building. I did receive the first price back. It's the only one I have back yet. It was for Marriott's Construction. The demolition work to demolish the building, base price of $5,610, with an option of $3,280 if they were to dig out any underground foundation work that we're not sure would be in the way of any new building. So we just may leave some of the existing underground, but we do have the option to take that out. We are seeking other prices.
Okay, and what do you anticipate having that for the legislative, or you bring it back to the next operations committee?
Be close. I'd probably bring it back to the next operations meeting.
Okay. Any questions from the committee or anyone else on the board?
Yeah, just, where are we with the replacement space for that? Did we bid that, or we're going to put a prefab up?
Correct. I've had preliminary discussions with Conestoga Buildings. They provide, I've toured several other buildings in this area that they've done, and they have a base model that will fit. It would be a match to the existing buildings on the site. They could build a building with the same colors, metal green roof that we have now, with sliding doors to match the other existing buildings. So it will fit into the look of the property. We talked, they're going to design specifications for us for their building that we could put out to bid for different contractors.
When would you hope to have this project completed?
I'm hoping to have this project completed before summer.
Before summer?
Yes.
Anybody else? All right. Next up, radon testing.
Yes, this is bringing back a discussion that we had at last meeting. Since the recordings failed, we can bring this discussion back up again. We had several requests from the communities. Do we provide testing in our schools? No, we have not in the past. I've talked to several school districts around. We have Delaware Valley School Facility Managers Association. There's school facility managers, Montgomery, Bucks, Delaware, Chester County. We even have a few from the Lehigh Valley, Some people from Philadelphia have chimed in on the association as well. So I did send a mass notification out, an email asking for any school districts provide me information if they provide testing. I only had 5 replies back from that testing, none of which were in Montgomery County. We had one Delaware County, one Bucks, and a few in Lehigh Valley area reply that they do conduct testing. Since then, I have learned that Laura Marion did do testing. They had trained their own staff to do testing, which I would not recommend doing. I would outsource it, yes, have a certified testing company provide that information for us. I also looked in, spoke to Element Environmental, who is our environmental consultant. They have not dealt much with schools. They do have clients throughout the state that have done testing. They will not conduct the testing themselves. So they did point us in the direction of a company that will do this work. We discussed what potential numbers would be if we were looking to do testing. Based on some preliminary information, it would probably be approximately $10,000 to do a complete testing within the district. Looking at EPA recommendations, what that complete testing would be was testing any classroom that is in contact with the ground or above a crawl space, which, knowing our buildings, with the exception of the second floor of the high school, the second floor of the middle school, and a few classrooms at Fort Washington, it would be just about every space we occupy in the district would be tested under the EPA recommendation. Also, looking forward into the EPA recommendations, what does this testing mean? They recommend first time around on EPA, if you do choose the testing, which is not required, just solely it would be voluntary testing, that any testing be done as short-term test at first, which is typically a 3-day sample be placed in a room by the laboratory, collected and taken back and sampled. Any tests coming back over 4 picocuries would require additional follow-up. And looking back at EPA recommendations, what follow-up means is take a look at your HVAC system, make sure it's working correctly, and provide a long-term test. And a long-term test they suggest is the entire school year. So the 9 months of a school year, they would recommend that we provide testing that entire time to get a longer-term results. Because these results will vary depending on weather conditions, time of the year, are windows open, what systems are running at the time. So really anything can vary this. Another aspect of the testing, excuse me, would be to test, they recommend testing through the months October through March, when the heating systems would typically be running and the building would be more likely to be closed up. Testing in spring, summer, or early fall does not make any sense because we will have windows open, so that air exchange would be there and you would get false readings. They also do not recommend performing any testing during severe weather conditions. Any windy days, any days with heavy rain or where the ground could be saturated, all these could affect the readings. So they really are limited on which days you should perform these tests. Looking on this, maybe believe the recommendation that I put forward right now is not perform any testing at this time. If we did find high levels, the EPA's recommendation would be adjust your HVAC system and go back and redo your testing again. I think at this time it would make more sense. Let's take the money that we do for testing and invest it into performing preventive maintenance, more preventive maintenance on our HVAC systems, making sure our outside air dampers are correctly operating, that we are bringing the correct amount of fresh air into each room of the building.
Okay, I have a few questions. So the 10K approximation, $10,000 approximation for cost, that includes testing all of those classrooms, almost all of the classrooms?
Yes, that's typical.
Okay.
They were giving me what they would typically charge for an elementary, typically charge for a middle school, and typically charge for
And does it include the follow-up or just the initial testing?
just the initial testing.
Does the EPA or other organizations recommend testing for other things, or are we talking, I know you asked specifically about radon, but is radon the only thing that we're not testing for that
That could be such a long
could
list.
be, should be, right,
my dealings with the EPA is if you ask, should I be testing for this, they're going to say yes. What's required and what's recommended, they're never going to say no to if you ask them if should I be testing for something. They have lists of tests that can go on and on that for different things that you can look at in buildings.
Okay, and, all right, anyone else have questions or comments? Stan?
Bob, do you know if there's any school district in the state or county that has a policy on radon testing or anything like that?
Nobody's gotten back to me with policies. It's just what they've done in the past for practice.
And
there was only one in Montgomery County.
Only one in Montgomery County.
Montgomery County tested, and I don't know the reasoning behind it, why they chose to do it. They just chose to do testing, but again, they did it with their own employees.
do we have any classrooms above crawl spaces in our school district?
The only crawl spaces we have would be at Fort Washington. The rooms on in the area, I guess the library, that second grade wing, possibly some of the third grade classrooms. They have a crawl space. They are above a crawl space. All of our other rooms, majority of our other rooms throughout the district sits directly on the slab itself.
Mm-hmm. But there's, in that crawl space, it's concrete in the crawl space.
That's correct. They have concrete floors in
And
the
then
crawl
above
space.
that is what, wood?
No, it'd be steel decking and concrete.
Steel decking? Okay. Do we have any granite countertops in our schools? Because I was reading, granite gives off radon. Do we have any granite countertops in any of our schools?
No, I think you're right. I think this would be the only building. I'd have to take a look at some of the windowsills. They may be slate, but I'm not 100% sure.
How about, do we have any well water that comes into our schools directly? Do we have any wells?
No,
'Cause
we do not.
that's another way of radon entering at least residential properties is through well water.
No, we do not have any wells. Some buildings do have some pump pits in their boiler rooms.
Okay. All right, that's it. Thank you.
I have a question. Committee, go ahead.
All right. Okay, so I know last time when we talked about this, we know that there's a difference with how we ventilate our HVAC systems in the schools versus residential, because I think you explained that each one of our classrooms actually brings in fresh air. Is that right?
That's correct. All of our classrooms, even the older ones, unit ventilators that you see in the older elementary schools have outside air dampers. They're connected to outside air. They also have transfers to the hallway. That way, if you don't overpressurize the room, you're not pushing air from the room. That's what prevents your doors from shutting. We do every once in a while have to adjust the transfer damper. You do see, we're finding this when we use our lockdown magnets to keep doors unlocked when you can't keep the door closed to the room, and we're finding that it is because we're overpressurizing the room with outside air and actually pushing the doors open.
Okay.
In the high school, some of the other systems at Maple Glen, they do bring in fresh air from rooftop units, and then it's pushed down into the classrooms themselves. Your household, you're really not bringing any air unless you have an open window.
Right. And I think that what you had said last time as well is that one of the things that we would do if we did a test was, and we came up with higher levels than what we should have, the first thing we would do, or the recommendation would be to adjust the HVAC settings. Is that right?
That's correct. We'd go in to each classroom and look at each unit ventilator, make sure the outdoor air dampers are opening correctly, that there's no blockages. Would be the first thing that we would take a look at. Okay.
So are we doing that now? I think that's what we kind of discussed last time, is that we would do that now to, and hope to, if we weren't going to do the testing.
Right now, we have custodians that go through, they change their air filters. Whether or not they're really paying attention to what the dampers are doing, I don't know.
Okay.
That needs to be a directive that we need to look at. And if we're doing it with staff, we would need some training, what they should be looking at. The other option would be bring a contractor in to do preventive maintenance to ensure that everything's working correct.
Okay. So I think what I'm in favor of is doing that, making sure that we have all the systems in place and working as they are, and then in the fall to do a 3-day test and to hopefully verify that what we're doing is correct and that we don't have radon in the buildings. And then if we don't, we know that there's a significant problem. But I guess that's kind of where I fall in this.
Joan?
My question really had to do with what the cost was of adjusting the HVAC systems, what we were discussing, and what Sarah was recommending.
Right now, I don't have a good cost for that. I would need to bring some people in to take a look at that. That would be work that we're looking at doing over the summer. I mean, can we do it with in-house staff in some instances? I believe we can. Everything, no. I think we would need some outside help from contractors with. Definitely be a project that we would work on during the summer. We'd be invasive to the classroom itself. You know, we typically go in, pull the filters out, and do a good cleaning of the vent themselves. So that would be the appropriate time to make sure that those dampers are working.
If we were to do that over the summer, is that taking time away from other projects, or would that, you know, when you said spend that same roughly 10,000 on doing this preventive maintenance, is that where you're thinking of?
In most, yes, to do this thoroughly would definitely be a reallocation of staff's timing, which would, any contractors coming in would greatly assist us so we can focus on other areas.
Okay, anybody else have comments or questions? Stan?
The 10,000 estimate, is that for the 3-day?
That would be strictly for the 3-day, yes.
Yeah, and Mrs. Rothman indicated to me that the Fort Washington electrical bid was roughly 50,000?
Yes.
50,000 below, so, or 60,000 below what we originally estimated, so I think the money would be there. So I would be in favor of allocating the 10,000 for the testing.
The money for the project is coming out of the capital projects, whereas this would need to be an operating expense because it's testing.
We can always transfer it, right?
We cannot transfer money back from capital into the general fund. It's just a point of clarification and technicality.
My feeling is that we ought to do that summer work. I'd like to hear more about what we would have to reprioritize or whether we would bring in contractors and what that would cost. So if that seems like something you could get to us next month, or at least in time to make this happen for the summer.
Yes, yeah, start working on that.
And then the decision about whether to actually test for radon, presumably there's a contract involved in that, and that would come to us at some, if we're going to do it in the fall, that's not a
Yes.
decision we're making now.
And we're really, the EPA recommend time frame, we're really at the end of it, wouldn't be able to organize a project of this size anyway. So the earliest that we would be conducting testing would be October by EPA recommendation.
Right, okay,
Yes.
so we don't need to make that decision now. There's no decision to make. Did you have something, Titia?
Is there a reason, or is there a way that we could prioritize certain buildings or certain classrooms in that in elementary schools kids seem to be staying in one room more of the time, whereas in high school, middle school, there's more transition? So if there's a particular area in the building that we're concerned about, that we prioritize that?
Can I just add to that thought that even if students are moving from place to place in the middle school and high school, the staff are not. So they're important to us as well. But you can answer the question if you...
It would be difficult to really choose any priority rooms over another because you don't know. You could have one room that could have a radon issue because of a simple small crack somewhere or just because of the soil that it's sitting on, where the other end of the building would have completely no readings because it's tighter. There's no radon coming up through that section of the ground.
Could have granite countertops in it, too.
So it would be difficult to really prioritize a single room. That's why EPA recommends you look at all rooms.
Amy?
I just want to clarify the timeline, just so that I understand it a little bit better. So if we were to go the route that we're currently thinking, we would not test, but we would assess the current functioning of our HVAC systems. Is that correct?
Yes.
Over the summer. And then we would have to look at it in October. And is the October timeline, because that's when the EPA recommends we test, that's the best time of year? Or is that because we need that many months to assess whether the HVAC system adjustments are working?
Now, we would have, our HVAC systems would be completed before the start of school. The October timeframe is really when the heating season starts, and depending on the weather, you may want to push it even further out. You want a time when the building's going to be closed up. If you're having days during the testing where people are opening windows for fresh air, classroom doors propped open a little bit in the morning, get some fresh air before the students arrive because it's nice outside, are really going to alter any effects. So that's why they recommend it's during heating season, but not during a time where you're having heavy rains, heavy winds.
Okay, just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
Okay, so I think what we are recommending then, I'm just going to try to recap, is that we do the HVAC work over the summer. You'll bring back to us exactly what that means in time to make that happen for the summer. And then we will revisit the specifics of testing for radon sometime later because we aren't going to do the testing until October at the earliest.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So anyone else have anything on that topic? All right. So we are up to, oh, no, we have update the joint services agreement with school districts of Springfield Township.
Mr. Ken King, the business administrator at Springfield, and I have chatted and talked about the agreement for next year. Due to a retirement of Mr. Wayne Johnston, we're discussing some changes to the contract, particularly about the labor sharing piece, his expertise. So I'm planning for the contract to come back at a significantly lower cost. However, Springfield's been experiencing the same weather situation as what we have, and so I don't have the contract to share with you tonight. I should have it at the April 19th meeting for vote on May 14th, excuse me.
Okay, thank you. And this is typically a one-year agreement.
1 year at a
historically, right?
time, yes. Yeah. Every year we look at the cost and the components of it, and obviously we're doing that again.
They'll have a new director in the fall?
They will.
I didn't hear that.
Actually, they'll have a new director, I think, in July. Mr. Johnson's retirement's effective June 30th.
Would we be working with their new director in the same capacity that we had Mr. Johnson?
No, we have a new director coming on board. If anything, if we want to work with Mr. Johnston, he'll be available probably as an LLC or something like that we could hire as a contractor as needed, not for the entire year.
Anybody else? Okay, thank you. So we are up to community input. If anyone from the community would like to address the committee, please.
I'm here, right? So I might as well. So I'm glad we had the further discussion about radon. I don't know anything, and I don't ever pretend to know anything really about radon, except for I know we have it here. And I went home after that last meeting and said, and Googled, and one article I came up with says, if you live in Fort Washington, you have radon. And so even though some of the school district outside in other areas of Pennsylvania don't do testing, I think it's good of us to do it. And I think the importance of having that test in the fall, so I appreciate that for I think that's $10,000 worth spending. Because we need a baseline. I mean, that's how I look at it. You get baselines for a lot of things to say, okay, we're okay here, so that we know that we're actually remediating and we're fixing the problem. And yes, we can be fixing the problem, but what if it was so high that what works for one classroom isn't working for another? So I think the testing is important from a baseline standpoint. And I think just to clarify as far as the classroom by classroom, and I don't know about radon, so this is really just a question. Like, for example, Fort Washington happens to have a whole hallway that's actually mostly underground, with one whole side of the rooms are covered underground. So would those classrooms be more likely to have radon than maybe someone who was just right on the ground? And that was that maybe that would prioritize on that hallway because it's mostly underground. Jarretown, I think, has some of those too. So that was just my question about that. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, so just to clarify what I think we just discussed, is that we would do the remediation first, and I shouldn't say the remediation. We would verify that all of our HVAC systems are working as they should before we do the testing, so that we have a good baseline. And the testing couldn't be done any sooner. Effectively, couldn't be done effectively any sooner than October. An article that says if you live in Fort Washington, you have radon, in my understanding, is not correct. The way that, as I understand radon works, is that if your neighbor has radon, that really doesn't tell you anything about whether you have radon, even just two houses next door to each other. So it's really about how air is managed within the building and what happens to be deep underground under your building. But I think that the air is the larger factor. So those underground classrooms, I'm using the word you use, but I don't think they're fully underground, but they have fresh air exchange as well?
They do. They do have fresh air exchanges. The main classrooms, I guess you would consider as underground, where it's on the crawl space side of the lower level of Fort Washington. They are the end rooms. The only exception would be the music room, where they do have the band practices. Those rooms do not have any outside windows, but they do have the ventilation systems.
Okay, thanks. Anyone else have any comments? Dr. Wheeler.
I would just like to confirm, clarify, verify that during this meeting this evening, there was no refusal to conduct radon testing in our buildings. I think we need to be very clear about that, because apparently there are reports circulating that this committee, a few minutes ago, determined that we were refusing to conduct radon testing. That is absolutely inaccurate. Thank you.
Dr. Ludwig.
We didn't really go through and ask who thinks we should be doing radon testing. I think if we did, a number of us would think we should do it. I don't know if you want to do that now, or, I mean, maybe it should wait, but.
We can see where we stand now. We don't actually have to make a decision on it until much later, because there's no, bid or contract or anything else to talk about in terms of formal board action. And it's not typical of us to take a vote on something when there's no action to be taken.
Well,
but if anyone wants to volunteer their opinion.
I did not give my opinion because when I asked questions, because I'm not on the operations committee, but I do think that since in this general area, there are often findings of radon. I know we haven't ever tested before, we're not obligated to, but I think given the fact that it is around in this area, it would probably be a good thing for us to test and just to make sure whether we do or don't have it. I agree with the proposal that Sarah brought forward that which is what the direction we were going anyway, of improving the HVAC, making sure everything is in good condition first, and then doing the short-term test. And I think it is the case that we have some of the piping under at least the high school, and that we would put it in the middle school. I mean, you can't test until you have a building finished and closed, so that if remediation were needed, it is not as big a job as if you had to do that. Anyway.
All right, anyone else? Amy?
I thought, based on the question I asked, the clarification before, that plan was that we would work on the HVAC systems over the summer, and that we were talking about testing in October. Am I confused?
That is what I thought as well. We don't have formal action to take now, but
Okay,
yeah, that
success.
seems to be the
The
current
thinking.
plan, yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that I didn't miss something.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay. With that, I think we are, I'm just going to verify the agenda. Yes, we are, the next meeting will be April 19th. and we are adjourned. Thank you. We're